Okay, we're on part 3, and I thought I'd go through this a little bit more. According to the principle of long-term self-interest, we don't do things that won't benefit us in the long term. That's not usually how businesses work, though. And one of the reasons why I really kind of want to go over some of this is when we look at long-term self-interest, it says you should never take any action that is not in your organization's or yours long-term self-interest. But because of the way we do financial reporting, a lot of businesses make decisions based on what we're going to report in the next quarter or next month. And those are short-term views of how things work, and that gets us in trouble a lot. In fact, that's where a lot of our ethical problems or ethical shortcuts that we do in business happen, because we're looking at those short-term gains instead of the long-term self-interest. So this is an important principle, the first one. The second one, personal virtue. It's that TV newspaper test where I'm like, well, should I do this? Would I be okay if this was printed in the paper or all my friends knew it, or if somebody posted on Facebook that this is what I did? Religious injunction. I know that religion, we're like, what do we mean by that? It's more of a community type of thing. We don't want to harm that sense of community. And so we don't want to do actions that would harm a sense of community. Government requirements are pretty straightforward. That's the laws or regulations that are under in effect. Utilitarian benefits states that you should never take an action that does not result in the greater good for society. Now sometimes, we have a lot of movies out there that are like, the evil person says, for the greater good. We do this for the greater good. We sacrifice you for the greater good. Again, we need to take a long-term greater good viewpoint. What is the... If I do X, who's going to benefit the most from this? And we could actually say that's one of the reasons why sweatshops are okay. In fact, Vietnam, who's a communist country, is supposed to protect the poor in the country, invites Nike in to create a sweatshop because they know it'll bring in infrastructure and it'll train people in manufacturing. And this is a short-term pain that they're going to go through, and in the long term, the wages will rise, and it will no longer become a sweatshop. That's what happened in Taiwan. That's what happened in China. You'll come in, and companies will invest to capture the really cheap labor, and eventually the wages will rise. And you'll go from a sweatshop environment to a high-functioning manufacturing environment. So utilitarian benefits will say, well, we'll sacrifice in the short term for the long-term benefits, and so we'll invite sweatshops into our country. Individual rights holds that you should never take an action that infringes on another person's individual rights. And when does a person get rights? And when do we call a person? That's some of the debates that are going on with the abortion, the anti-abortion pro-choice arguments. Is a fetus a person? When does it become a person? As soon as it becomes a person, then it has rights. We need to protect those rights. And if it's not a person until it actually is born, so that's some of the debate. The principle of distributive justice really says you should never take any action that harms the least fortunate in your community. So we want to protect those people who are least able to protect themselves. Okay, we're going to move on fairly quickly. One of the things that we as managers need to look at is hiring people that have high ethics. And how do we do that? How do we figure out who has high ethics? There's different kinds of tests. An overt integrity test is giving you a bunch of different questions, asking you how you view stealing in many different ways to see if at least you respond with some sense of consistency. So you're not wishy-washy, at least on your views of people taking money out of the teller or whatever it is. A personal-based integrity test is more non-overt, more roundabout. What kind of personality you have, and does that personality lead to ethical decision-making or unethical decision-making? These are some ways that we hire to help, or some things we put our people that we're hiring through to help figure out and weed out the people that might not have the, let me take these out, I don't need them, the integrity that we want. Another thing that they don't talk about is getting recommendations from employees that you know have good ethical standards and good work ethics. And if they have friends that need jobs and they can give them a good recommendation, usually if they care about who they are and their reputation, they won't give us a recommendation that of somebody who doesn't have good integrity. That's one of my favorite ways. Also, you can also do like a temp hire. So we're going to hire you through a temp agency for 6 months, just to see what kind of person you are. You've passed the first few tests that we've given you. Now let's see you in action. After 6 months, if you seem like an ethical person, then we move from a temporary position to a full-time hire. Once we have people, we want to make sure that we have a code of ethics that's established. And not only that we have a code of ethics that's established, but that we're teaching and developing standards and procedures that we're reiterating to our employees to make sure that everyone knows this is how we do business, and this is what we're expecting of the people that are working for us. So training becomes a huge part of that. It develops employees' awareness, it achieves credibility with the employees, and it teaches employees a practical model of ethical decision making. Now we're going to get into one model. This isn't the only model of ethical decision making, and I think my head's going to get in the way. Let's see. That's not helping. Here. Okay, I'm going to move this down. How about up? And maybe identify the problem. Actually, this is in your book, and I'll just suggest that you look in the book. You really need to know the order in which they come. I know there's a test question that says, of the steps of ethical decision making, what is number 1, 2, or 3? So you might even tag this in your book so when the test comes, you're ready for it. All right. Developing an ethical climate. I don't like this word. There we go. Developing an ethical climate. Part of this is the culture. Do we have an ethical culture? When we see our managers make decisions, are they just going after the money, or are they really thinking about the community and about the employees and about well, there's two different kinds of models. There's a shareholder model and there's the stakeholder model. And we'll get into those. And the climate where we're really looking at the stakeholders is a more ethical, I think, more ethical climate, even though there's a lot of different economists and business people that will say, no, it's really the shareholder. And Milton Friedman has a great argument that it's a shareholder ethical model. So we have a fiduciary duty, meaning that I represent the shareholders of the company, and it's my duty to make them the most money I can. And I'm not really worried about the community in general. That's for other people to take care of, right? As soon as I, as a manager, start donating to charities, unless I think it's going to increase the bottom line for my shareholders, then it's not something that I should do. But we'll get into that later. But the most important thing is whichever paradigm you take, you really need to be consistent. You need to develop a culture. That means you put posters, you have, they call them artifacts around the community about our ethical behavior. When we find ethical violations, that we're consistent in getting at them and punishing people consistently. Okay, and here we go. To whom are organizations responsible? Are we responsible to the shareholders, which are the people who own the business, or are we responsible to the stakeholders? And that's everyone who's affected by the business. So in the stakeholder model, we have different groups. We have primary stakeholders and we have secondary stakeholders. And these are the people who are affected by the decisions that the company is making. So if we get into here, this is, maybe I can blow this up a little bit. Right. So we have primary stakeholders, which it would be the community, the employees, the customers, the shareholders, and the suppliers, even the government. So those are, if I'm looking at the stakeholder model, first I have a responsibility to make sure all these people are protected or at least not damaged by the actions my company takes. And then when we go into the secondary stakeholder, we have we go into media, special interest groups, and trade associations. We worry about media. We want to make sure that we have a good PR or a good public image with at large, because that will influence our political leverage, right, so to speak. So again, when I'm making decisions in this model, in the stakeholder model, I'm first looking at my primary stakeholders and making sure that the decisions I'm making will support them, and then I move on to my secondary stakeholders. Oh, this is, let me see. There we go. For what are organizations socially responsible? We can be responsible for the economy. We can help the economy. We have legal responsibilities. This whole thing is about ethical responsibilities. And then we have discretionary responsibilities. I'm not sure I want to spend a lot of time on this. This is the last slide. I kind of skipped a couple of slides. I'd still encourage you to read the book. This is a good chapter and it leads well. I'd also encourage you to take business ethics, which is a great class. I teach it and it's actually fun. Social responsibility, and this is fun too. I'm just saying it's fun too. Social responsibility and economic performance. One of the things that when I've been studying ethics, there really isn't a trade-off between social responsibility and economic performance. Usually, if you are socially responsible, you'll get the economic performance you want, as long as you're doing it in a reasonable way. We're not giving away all of our money. We're not. There's a lot of companies that have tried to do some amazing things. Like one company in California said, the lowest paid employee will at least make $70,000 a year, and that stirred up a lot of problems for that company. At first, everyone thought, "Oh, this is a great idea. They're being really proactive, and this minimum wage thing, they're just taking that off the table." But then there are people that are like, "Wait, I went and got a degree. I'm working really hard, and I'm making just a little bit more than somebody who doesn't have a degree and just doesn't have the stress and responsibilities or putting in the same time that I am." And eventually the company folded within like a year. So there is a limit to being socially responsible. I mean, we need to do it within reason. But as long as we're thinking, well, should we do this? It's cheaper, but it's going to hurt the environment. Okay, then we're not going to do it. Right? And we're going to play by the rules. I know this has been a long video. I'm sorry. But that's it for ethics. I hope you enjoyed it.